Cool. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, it's Tim Sackett. Thanks for joining today, The Forgotten Tools of Recruiting, and we'll get right into it. So if you don't know who I am, check me out. I'm obviously the blogger number one at the aptly named Tim Sackett Project, blogger number one through 1 million, since I'm the only one who blogs on the Tim Sackett Project. It's at timsackett.com. Also, I got my kind of career in HR and talent acquisition writing started over at Fistful of Talent. I'm sure many of you read that blog as well. And I'm still a writer and video blogger and podcaster and all that crap over there. So I like this because we're talking about recruiting tools. I have to start off with I'm not very handy, to say the least, right? So you see a picture of my dog. I'm really good with dogs, and I'm really good with cooking. I'm not very good with tools. So I had one of those glass shower doors my wife asked me to fix, and really all it was like the little wheel on the top of the door was was sticking, and so it wouldn't slide very well. So I'm like, oh, it's easy enough. You just kind of pull it off, take it off, replace the wheel. I broke the entire door. So by the time my wife got home, I had taken the entire door frame off, put up a shower curtain rod with a shower curtain, and we are now having a professional contractor come over and remodeling our entire master bath because that's how bad I screw crap up. So now you know a little bit more about me. Also, I'm considered the world's foremost expert on workplace hugging. If you want to know more about that, you can Google it. I'm sure you'll find it. If you're watching on the notes, I said hi to Terrell Bronson. He's the director of TA over at Ashley Home Furnishings. We actually worked together at Applebee's International when I was running TA over there. So say hi to him. But let's get started and get right into this. Also want to thank, obviously, the great folks at Jobvite for allowing me to come on today and talk with them. If you're in the market for an ATS or even some other products that they sell, make sure you check them out. Love Jobvite. I've been on them early since they began, and Dan and the crew over there kind of brought them to market, so that's really awesome. I want to get kind of started, right? One is hiring really harder? Do we feel that hiring is really harder? And I think probably most of us does, right? This is just kind of looking at like skilled trades, construction type workers, and it's early, so it's second quarter, 2017 kind of study that was done. So this is really up to date, and so a little over 60% are saying, heck yeah, it's way more difficult to hire now than it has been. And when we take a look at kind of the top 5 business challenges, the same thing keeps cropping up, right? Really super small SMBs. Hiring employees is in the top 5, and as you grow and keep getting bigger, this hiring employee challenge continues to kind of come up. And if you were to take a look at over 500 employee companies to 50,000, the hiring employees issue is going to be in the top 3 challenges of all of those businesses going upwards. So clearly, hiring is getting harder. But I think what most people would say is, oh, well, it's because there's a lack of talent. And I'm wondering, is it really because of that? Because I have a feeling, right, that it's not really because that there's a lack of talent out there. I think actually because of the social footprints now, that it's never been easier to actually find talent. I think that when you take a look at LinkedIn, Facebook, IG, Snap, professional sites like GitHub, Stack Overflow, whatever it might be, it's never been easier to find talent in the entire history of recruiting. Literally. But if you take a look at this slide, most recruiters would say that hey, we're still because of the shortage of candidates. And so I don't necessarily think that, right? Obviously, I'm sure economics, supply, demand are at work definitely, but we can still find great talent. The question is, are you willing to pay for it? Are you willing to do what it's going to take to get talent to come work for you? All of those great things that kind of take place and happen definitely becomes a challenge. So when we take a look at all of this top of funnel stuff has really kind of never been easier. So this is obviously just a graph that Jobvite puts out there, and we take a look at kind of the recruiting funnel. I'm sure a lot of you kind of use recruiting funnels to look at your TA stats. I take a look at it. We take a look at this gray, the gray part above the gray part. So the very top layer is everything you do to kind of get people into either an application status, interview status, or offer status. So all of this top of funnel stuff that we've done is really kind of what we're talking about today when we talk about those forgotten tools of recruitment. We're kind of looking at what are those things that it takes to kind of fill the top of the funnel, to kind of get all of those candidates to kind of come in and say, hey, I'm interested, I'm in love with you, please hire me, and all of that that we do. So I'm not going. That's really just kind of the introduction, kind of where we came up with the concept. Because when we took a look at this kind of forgotten tools, at first I was like, oh, it's going to be it's old school, right? Because I think as we start to look and move into all these kind of the technology that's out there, and I'm a huge technology geek. If you read my blog, every single Tuesday, for the most part, during the summer I might get off track a little bit, but I highlight a new TA technology that's out there in a series of blog posts that I write, and I'll take a look from ATSs to sourcing technology to just about anything, the AI, a lot of the new AI stuff that's out there that's helping us attract candidates to our talent pools. And so when Jobvite and I talked about like, hey, let's go and really talk about something that can help TA shops right now, I said, oh, here's the concept. And so it was the forgotten tools. But what I found when I started writing this was there was actually some of the tools are actually pretty modern, but people still have forgotten them because the tech is moving so fast. We just jump from tech to tech to tech, and we go, wait a minute, that tech actually worked really, really well. Why aren't we continuing to double down on that and use that more? So those are some of the things I want to highlight today. And I have 7 of them. There's many more, but we'll talk about 7, and then you can ask me a bunch of questions because I'm sure there's going to be specifics in all of that. And so we'll get to up. I know there's audio problems, so if you're having audio problems, try to log in or log out, log back in, see if that fixes the system from that standpoint. I'm on a hard line, so there's nothing really more I can do to kind of fix it on that standpoint. First one. So I want to take a look at this and take a look at source of hire. So when we take a look at source of hire, we kind of go around through here, and I would say this is very typical. Now, this is data from Jobvite, so they're taking a look at all of those users in organizations that use Jobvite and say, hey, what's your number one source of hire? And across the board, it's going to come back, right? 39.9% employee referrals is our number one source of hire. And then you start taking a look at career sites, job boards, all these other things, right, that we get people, agencies in there. So there's a lot of reasons. So I'm like, that's cool. Yep, I would suspect that. I think if you ask any company, obviously you're going to have like some big job board sources like Indeed and LinkedIn are going to be up there. We hope our career site's driving traffic. But I think any company would say at least in the top 3, employee referrals is probably going to be a source of hire. So then you go, okay, well, what's the recruitment spend look like? Well, where are we spending money? And then you go, okay, well, 30% job ads, recruitment agencies, those are always expensive. All this technology and recruiting tools, bam, employee referral program, 9%. Remember this slide, right? 40% employee referrals, 9% employee referral program spend. Therein lies the problem, right? So the number one tool that I have down, right, is going to be the employee referral program. So often, this is what I see. It's the number one source, and yet it's like the number 7, 9, 8, 9, 10 spend. When I go in to large organizations and do like TA consulting, I find this almost every single time that they'll say, oh my gosh, Tim, yeah, gosh, if we could just get more referrals. And I'll say, okay, how much are you spending on your referral program? And we'll go through and take a look. And then the number one, right, is usually like, oh, we're spending $300,000 on LinkedIn Recruiter, and it's so great, and our recruiters love it. And yet it's like the number 7 source of hire, and it's their number one spend. Like we have to dig into these stats and really take a look at what's your number one source, not only for numbers, but also for quality, and then go back through and do that analysis and really kind of go back through and reevaluate. A lot of us right now have Indeed as a pretty major spend. When you go back through with all the changes with Google Jobs and the API that opened up, that's going to be a lot less. So you have to kind of, again, reanalyze where your spend is going to be and how that's going to work. When we take a look at employee referral automation, I just said I think it's the single most underutilized recruitment technology on the planet. Like there's no better money right now that you can spend. If I went into any organization, they said, Tim, you have $25,000 to spend to help us recruit better, more people, what would we do? I would automate their employee referral program today. And it wouldn't even stop. Even if they didn't even have an ATS, I would do that first. So you have to know what's actually being used and what's good. Now, I'm not saying this because Jobvite actually started the employee referral automation I would say, market or industry, because they did. But now, obviously now they embedded it into their ATS, so that's awesome. That's kind of best case. You want that. But the reality is that there's all kinds of employee referral automation programs out there now that you can select and use, and they actually integrate with Jobvite very well on the ATS side as well. What I'm saying is, I don't care who you use, you need to use this. And so again, from an ROI perspective, you can't go to your CFO, your CEO, and say more than, hey, by the way, it's our number one employee, our source of employee. It's also our number one quality of hire, and we need to figure out a way to do this better. Now, here's what I've found, and I've done this in a number of organizations where I've come in with an employee referral program that they just kind of had that was, I would say, analog. So it's just kind of one of those that you throw on the board. Maybe you send out some emails once in a while, and they were getting high referral bonuses. And then we jumped and said, okay, now we're going to do employee referral automation. We're going to actually nix bonuses altogether. We're never going to give another bonus for a referral of one of your employees of another employee that they hire. We might do some other things, right? We'll throw them, a pair of sunglasses or a pair of Beats or an iPod or whatever. I don't care. But we're not going to give them cash anymore. Instead, we're going to use all of that money for technology, employee referral automation. And across the board, you will see anywhere from 15 to 40% increase in employee referrals first year, without actually spending any more money, because you're not giving out all those referral bonuses anymore. What you find is that the automation itself, the reminder, the constant kind of push, the ease of use with employee referral automation, is that you'll have not only those employees who would refer regardless if you paid them or not, you'll have another whole segment of people that will actually also go out and refer employees and not even think twice about it. They can actually leverage the social networks they have and do this. And the people that love working for you will go out and refer more people that will love working for you. I'm just a gigantic fan. We already know this too, right? So we have this entire kind of situation that happens, and now we have years of data that show not only do you get a higher quality when you get more referral hires, you also get a higher tenure. So for those companies who are struggling with turnover, guess what? Get more employee referrals. You're going to have a higher tenure of those individuals that actually come. And again, the spend is 1,000 times greater return on ROI than you get from a lot of like these job board 2.0s that are out there that you're spending literally most of your budget on right now. I just can't talk highly enough. So number one, I'm going to get off that little soapbox I have, because I just still think if we could just shut the the webinar down right now and you just took that one idea back and did it, you would gain everything you need today just by doing that. And I'll tell you, literally 80% of you on this call today are not doing it. So, gosh, take a look at it. Really go out and engage employee referral automation, and you're going to do well. So, number two, the forgotten. And when I talk about the forgotten, I'm talking about forgotten talent pools. Somehow along the line, we fell in love with just hiring young people. And I don't say this because I'm an old person. I'm not necessarily super old, but I'm obviously older than a lot of people. But we fell in love with hiring millennials, Gen Z. Really, if you're 35 and under, we put this gigantic kind of extra, oomph onto you to just say, hey, this person, they're so much better. The reality is I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. If you think about, I love hiring older people because I think they come with so much less baggage. Here, and I'll give you my own story, right? I have 3 sons, and so when I was like 32 and I had 3 kids at home, and I'm trying to go to work, and also I'm coaching Little League and soccer and running a kid, I have a kid that's sick, and my wife has to work, and I have to work, and we don't have help with all this stuff that happens. I will tell you I wasn't the best employee. And I will tell you most people in my situation weren't the best employees. And yet I can go and hire like a 53-year-old that's an empty nester, and they would literally work 100 hours a week, 7 days a week, stay nights. They would do whatever because they don't have all those same issues at play. But yet somehow we've forgotten about that talent pool. I recently hired in the last year, 2 stay-at-home moms. So they were out of the workforce, one for like 7 years, one for about 3 years. And they might be the 2 best employees I've hired in my entire career. Like, they knock it out of the park. When they come to work, they think it's a freaking vacation comparable to what they went through at home. They love coming to work. They give everything. And they actually think it's easy comparable to the job they had before, which is being a full-time mom. So again, we tend to look at that and go, oh gosh, like you've been out of the workforce, like you have no skills. Guess what? I can teach just about anybody to do anything. Maybe not be a lawyer or a doctor, but almost every other skill that's out there, like I can kind of teach them how to do that. So definitely forgot about that. When I was at Applebee's, I loved hiring people that kind of needed a second chance. And I think a lot of us are in situations where we can hire people that need a second chance, and there's organizations out there that we can partner with that will actually help kind of alleviate some of the risk of going out and hiring somebody that maybe spent some time in jail or have kind of a sketchy background that normally we would walk away from. And if you get some of those individuals and you give them that second chance, again, study after study shows performance is higher, tenure is higher. They have a real loyalty built in because you're the one that actually gave them that second chance. And I hire veterans in my company as well. And I'll tell you that I run an IT engineering staffing firm out of Michigan, and we place nationally. And we work with a lot of companies that publicly they'll come out and say, oh gosh, yeah, we're going to hire 10,000 veterans this year. And behind the scenes, when you start working with hiring managers, they have a real bias towards not wanting to hire veterans. And so, again, 4 great talent pools that we're forgetting about. And when we talk about recruiting tools and forgotten recruiting tools, here's 4 pools of talent that your hiring managers are turning up their nose to, that are chock full and loaded with really talented, loyal, people that want to show you what they can do and are going to be around for a long time. So make sure you check that out. Take a look at the demographics, and they're playing against us as well. We know we have a gigantic baby boomer population that's retiring en masse that still wants to work. I have a 72-year-old father who retired 2 years ago. He's been out of the workforce for 2 years, and he's like, I am so sick and tired of just sitting at home. I can't wait to get back to work. And he's now going to go and work 30 hours a week at a company, and he will be exceptional. He was an executive at a company, and now he's going to go do customer service for somebody, or do a job like that. Like, we have to open our eyes to a workforce that we know is aging very quickly, and it's a gigantic pool of talent. The reality is your hiring managers right now, when they take a look at this slide, they're super uncomfortable with it, right? You have minorities, older people, stay-at-home moms, and they go, oh my gosh. They would take a look at the faces of these people and say, can't you find me someone that's young? Can't you find me one of those 30-year-olds that have 23 years of experience? Like, that's who I really want to hire. This is an issue. This is a problem. The pool is there. It's a forgotten pool of talent. We need to make sure that we go out there and really kind of work with our hiring managers. And I'll tell you, and I put this slide in for a reason, because I think if you get to a point in your company where you can't point out each other's biases and talk about them openly. Now, again, I don't mean you go out there and say, hey, John, you're a hiring manager and you hate women and this is the reason you won't hire a stay-at-home mom. That's probably not the best tact. I think at a very high level organizationally, you can pull out some demographic data and show where the biases are and have some real open, honest conversations about what this is. And sometimes behind closed doors, individually, one-on-one with a hiring manager, you might have to say, look, and again, I had worked at some big companies where we were able to go in and show hiring managers to say, look, you have a bias towards not wanting to hire women in leadership positions, or you have a bias of not wanting to hire minorities in leadership positions as compared to your peer group, and understand the executives are going to look at this data and you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. So let me help you. Let me help you get some people into those positions that we need to, that are really talented people, and also are going to help you, show that you have a more diverse kind of leadership team, workforce, whatever it might be. So that's how I would use that tact of going out there and getting people to kind of, the hiring managers to kind of maybe more aggressively go after talent pools they normally wouldn't. This is one of my favorites because I come out of the agency world, started my career in recruiting in the agency world, then went corporate TA for about a decade, and now I'm back in the agency world. And I'll say a forgotten tool is the phone. Recruiters hate making phone calls. They'll tell you they don't because it's not politically correct and no one wants to be that way. But the reality is it happens time and time again. This is a classic sales study that I'm showing you, and it plays out, and I've done it in my own shop for years, and I have all the data because we measure every single call that's made incoming and outgoing in my shop. And here's what happens is that almost all recruiters will give up after the second phone call. So it's like a 90% failure rate. So if you don't get a return call or you don't get that connection, by a little over 90% will give up after they've done only 2 phone calls. So even if you make yourself, right, get your team on the phone, by the second call they give up, they no longer call. Even if that person that they were calling is the best possible candidate for you. Now, what the sales cycle has showed us and what my own team year after year showed us is that by the 7th call, 97% will actually return your call and call you back, even if it's just to say, stop stalking me, you psychopath. But the reality is they actually will call back. And what my team has found is that many of those calls that they get on the 5th, 6th, 7th time is a person going, you know what, thanks so much for continuing to pursue me. I might not be interested, but I sure respect the hustle. And the other side of it is a lot of times you're going, I'm so freaking busy, and I keep wanting to call you back, and you keep reminding me, thank you for that, because I am interested. And some of the best hires, some of the best talent we find are on that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th call. Now, what we find, though, is that most shops, especially on the corporate side, don't even look at phone calls. Actual candidates have said the preferred method, they want to be contacted. Usually to start is by email. So hey, boom, email, call me. Hey, here's the thing I have, and then it very quickly starts to ramp up where the phone call becomes really important. What I'll say is, in my organization, we kind of have a triple threat thing that we use where we'll do email, phone call, text message all at the same time for every candidate, and we get a really high response rate on that. What I find, though, is most corporate TA shops kind of do this, right? They measure success of recruiting on these kind of benchmark results, which are, how many applicants and how many interviews to offers and offers to hires. Very few actually measure recruiting phone calls. I mean, it's almost non-existent. When you get into the agency side, it's a little bit higher, but still a really kind of low percentage overall, which is kind of shocking for me, having grown up on both sides. What I'll tell you is as soon as you start to measure phone calls of your recruiters in a corporate environment, you will see a drastic change. And again, how I do it usually is to implement some kind of digital call recording software that's going to record the metrics and calls. And so by phone, so every recruiter kind of has their own. I will actually implement that in an off time because usually you can download that, implement that within your phone system, and nobody actually even knows that it's happening because IT is kind of always doing stuff. They don't have to do anything to the actual phones. And I'll let it run for 30 days, 60 days, and I'll never say a thing. I never tell people we're doing it, never say a thing because I need a benchmark, right? I need to know what are the actual calls that are being made right now. And it's shocking at the low number of calls and call time that you'll see your team is actually on the phone, even though they'll tell you, oh my gosh. And I will go there. Usually when I go in and do some consulting work, I talk to TA leaders in a speaking gig or whatever, I'll say, hey, just show of hands or just kind of shout out, how long are your recruiters on the phone on a weekly basis? And people will say 30 hours, 20 hours, 25, 40 hours. The reality is my top recruiters who are on the phone constantly busting ass are on about 8 hours a week. Because if you think about, if they're making 200 calls, 250 calls a week, they're probably, a lot of those calls are 13-second calls. Hi, this is Tim. I got this great opportunity. Here it is. Call me back. That's a 15-second call. And if they do that and they're sourcing and they're doing all of that stuff, they feel like they're on the phone constantly, but the reality is they're really not. When I first implemented the call software, I was shocked to find out the average recruiter was on the phone about 4 hours a week. Once we went live and said, and I didn't use it as a gotcha, I just needed that benchmark and said, hey, we're gonna start this call software. Now we're gonna measure everything. And here's the goals, right? I already knew the benchmark, so I set goals based on maybe 10% higher than where we already were, and we're going to keep pushing that number. And it was amazing, the number of placements, the number of interviews, everything got moved up exponentially, not because of the funnel benchmarks you're seeing here, but only because we started measuring phone calls. So we forget how important phone calls are. We still tend to kind of overuse mass email. We send a ton of email. The reality is there's 1,000% difference in terms of reply rate from a phone call to email messages. And the reality is it takes us almost exactly the same amount of time to call somebody as it does to email. It might even be quicker to call. In the time studies we've done in my own shop, it's virtually a kind of a wash, right? You can do both about the same time. So super important that we stick to the phone. I know most TA leaders, TA pros, when I speak on the corporate side, they hate to talk about this. It's the one thing I did on the corporate side when I went in and took over a TA shop corporately was institute, call metrics. And about half my team quit. Those were the people that just wanted to be an administrative kind of function and didn't really want to recruit. They wanted to administer a recruiting process. I needed a really kind of hunters and farmers out, not farmers, and wanted headhunters out there. So when we did that, it worked out really, really well. Next one, so what are your recruiters spending their time on? So again, obviously we know it's not phone calls. So out of that 35 hours a week that they're in the shop not doing that, what are they kind of doing? And so I'll give you a little bit of example of what that is. So when I first went, and I wasn't sorry, my computer is freezing up. When I first went into a healthcare situation and ran TA for them, one of the things I did was run in right away and just kind of said, hey, we're not going to do meetings anymore. And because I found out that it seemed like about at least half their week was in these meetings. And it wasn't meetings with like one-on-one with hiring managers, like intake meetings. It was just random meetings that they kept getting pulled into. And so we said, nope. Cancel meetings. You can't go to a meeting anymore. You can now just sit at your desk and actually source and call candidates and recruit and interview and do all those great things that we're supposed to be doing. Again, shocking at kind of what happens. The reality is I don't need our recruiters, and not one recruiter I think probably on this thing actually hire employees. Usually, recruiters are actually building relationships with candidates. Hiring managers are hiring employees. But if you don't spend time with candidates, then you're never going to do that. So great talent and finding great talent, hiring great talent isn't about moving fast. It's about fit and trust. Obviously, everything is moving faster nowadays, but the reality is there comes a time when you find the right person, you have to slow down and build that trust, and we know that's important. So when I was at the health system and we canceled that meeting, one of the things that cropped up was really what we found was this, right? So this kind of relationship building pyramid where we were spending a ton of time in everything below. So meetings and LinkedIn and Facebook and all the social stuff that we're trying to do to get in content development. The reality was that we were spending really, really tiny amount of time one-on-one with candidates. And when we flip-flopped it and said, hey, we're going to focus on spending most of our time with candidates, face-to-face, bring them in, a lot of crazy things happened. One is the actual organization, hiring managers, felt better about the talent we were giving them because we could actually have real conversations with hiring managers about talent that we met, that we spent time with, that we knew a little bit more of. We eliminated a ton of those crappy interviews where you go, well, screen. Okay, yep, you're interested. Yep, we're interested in you. Show up at 9 a.m. on Friday, and the manager will interview, and the manager calls you and said, oh, my gosh, this person's awful. We eliminated a ton of that bad interview. And we ended up with a lot more of like just really, really good interviews because of the conversations. A crazy thing happened is that we found a ton of talent that we thought would work for one position, and as we built that relationship and spent time with them one-on-one, we actually realized that they were really good for another position in our company, and we were able to put them onto other recs, other hiring managers, and they were just like, oh my gosh, how did you find this person? Like, how did you know? Well, again, we're spending less time in meetings, more time actually kind of creating relationships with candidates. And it's just crazy how it really transformed the talent acquisition function, not only from an effectiveness standpoint, but from a perception standpoint. Like the hiring managers were like, wait a minute, you guys are doing stuff differently. You stopped showing up at our meetings, but you're actually finding a lot better talent. And the reality was is the actual overall number of people we were finding wasn't necessarily higher than before, but the quality of information that we had and the misses were much lower in terms of what we were finding. So again, kind of a forgotten tool is relationship building when it comes to candidates. We're moving so fast that we're not spending time with candidates and really learning about their desires, their wants, their needs, what they want, what's the best fit for them within the organization. Instead, we're just trying to shove them onto Rex as fast as possible. And it really is becoming a pretty low-valued kind of process within the organization from a hiring manager standpoint. Next one, your ATS is a gold mine, and I have some really good data and a story that I want to share about this. First and foremost, we already know that about 65% of resumes in high-volume positions are just flat out ignored, right? And most ATSs are pretty awful at letting us know when we're missing out on somebody. So somebody applies for a position, you think they're great, but somebody else applied before them that was also great, and so a month later, they're just forgotten about. They're just kind of, one of those leaves that fell off the tree and someone raked them up and got rid of them. Also, AI technology right now in terms of candidate rediscovery is really kind of helping us out with this. There's a ton of really great AI tools that are out there that are kind of really changing the entire ecosystem around talent and raking. And not when I say talent ecosystem, it's your ATS, it's your sourcing tools, it's your LinkedIn, it's your all of that stuff, right? It's taking all of these kind of candidates from all these different pools that you have and saying, hey, by the way, here's who you should be talking with first. And what you find is that within your ATS, there's going to be a ton of people that have already applied to you that said, oh my gosh, we love you, and that you've already had, that you never knew before because, again, most of our ATS technology that are out there right now just do a terrible candidate rediscovery. Some of them are getting better, and there's a lot of add-on kind of technologies that you can get as well that will help you out. And so how do I know this? So my company does project RPO work. We do consulting, direct hire. We do contract hiring, all this other stuff. And about a year ago, a Midwest manufacturing company came to us and said, oh my gosh, we have this big project. I need to hire 15 kind of technical hires, engineers, quality, all these different things. We need to do it in the next 90 days. They were in a really kind of hard to, Midwest kind of, let's say, central Indiana kind of area where you're not going to just have 15 kind of high-tech people laying around looking for jobs. And we came in and said, okay, well, I'll do two things. One is let me look for your ATS before we tell you a cost in the project. And also let's, kind of go through. And so if you think about that, normally, right, when we kind of came in and said, hey, we can do this entire thing, hiring 15 people for about $7,000. Normally that would be about, so it ended up being about a $100,000 fee. Usually it'd be like $250,000 because my own team went in and did the analysis on their ATS and said they have most of the talent already there. It's already in their system. They just don't know how to pull it out. And so we actually hired 12 out of the 15 hires of people that had already applied to those jobs within their own ATS. And we did it under 90 days. We did it within about 60 days. So and this is pretty common, so I already know your own ATSs are in the same kind of issue, right? And again, the ATS that we're using would be considered a top 10 ATS in the marketplace. And so they had good tech. Their own people just didn't really know how to use it, or a lot of times what happens is, hey, we had a process engineering rec, we hired a person, that was great, 15 other people applied, they all must be pieces of crap because we didn't hire them. The reality is 10 of them could have been great, you just hired one and didn't hire the other 9. And so they already have this kind of stigma of, oh yeah, that person applied already, we don't want them. Or somebody applied 3 years ago and They just didn't have the skill set. But guess what? Now they have 3 years of experience. And how many times do we hear from a hiring manager like, oh, I just want somebody with a degree and 3 years of experience? Like, okay, here's one, and we'll go out there and do that. So that's one of those things that I think when we take a look at it, for me, the ATS is a complete gold mine that we're sitting on, and most of us just don't have any idea of how to really kind of leverage that data and all the information that we have. So again, double back down, find the technology that's going to pull all that great stuff, nurture the candidates that have already told you they love you within your database, and go find that out. Next one, go long on texting. I talked to you a little bit about the triple threat aspect of what we use in our own shop, which I love, which is we email, we text, we call every candidate, and the success rate is high. Here's what we know, right? SMS, text messaging, on average, the open rate is 98%. Think about it in your own terms. How many times do you get a text message that you never look at, you never open? I'll tell them. For me, it's zero. Every time I get a text message, I at least look at my phone. It's right there. I'll say, oh, this is from Sprint. Like, yeah, it's just spam. I don't need that. But the reality is I see it. Now, I'll tell you there's a number of times, and I can go through on a daily basis, that I probably delete 50 emails that from the subject line alone I won't even open. It's just boom, 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 auto-delete, and I just bust through those. So the text messaging we already know has completely super high kind of open rates. And then on the click-through rates, again, same kind of thing, conversions higher. And then in terms of the timing aspect, it's insane. So when you have those hiring managers come to you and they're like, oh my gosh, we have this super urgent need, we need to go through and get hold of people very fast. Like, does your system, or do you have the ability within your process to go and text, let's say, I'll use my engineering example, right? Process engineer. I have 100 of them in my ATS. Can I text all 100 process engineers instantly, like within minutes of that hiring manager saying, hey, we have this opening. It's in the middle of Tennessee. Go out there and send a quick text to see if anyone's interested. Do you have that ability? Because you should. Because a modern kind of talent acquisition platform should have that ability. Now, when you're talking about texting candidates, it's not just can we just have my recruiters use their own cell phone? Because I'll tell you, when we first started, that was something we were asking our recruiters to do, and not meant to be a gender issue thing, but a lot of my young female recruiters, and we deal with mostly male candidates being in the tech environment, they struggled with wanting to use their personal cell phones to text a ton of male candidates all over the world. And I totally understood, because sometimes those interactions can get creepy, and if you're a female and you're a recruiter, you've probably had that happen to you, and I have enough stories with my own team. And and again, we actually can text through our ATS now, so that is not an issue, but at the time we couldn't, so we had to find ways around it, and you can actually get a Google Voice account, and it will actually send the text messages to the candidate via text, but you actually will get the response via email, which is really great. I'll tell you, as we kind of got more sophisticated, what happened was we had this desire to capture both sides of conversation for development purposes, for legal purposes, for all kinds of things, that I needed to know what my recruiters were talking to candidates about and what they were talking to them back and forth. And so you want to have a system that will capture both sides, and do that in a way that is really dynamic. So I know there's systems out there that you can actually capture those conversations and actually then send them in a document, like a PDF document, to a hiring manager, which is really great. You should have like these rules of engagement, and so what's the expectation for your recruiters if a candidate, texts them at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night? Is there a rule that they should be getting back with those candidates, and sometimes every individual recruiter sets their own rules of engagement within a framework of kind of the organizational rules, but it's great to kind of know that. You want to be able to measure it for sure, because you want response rates, you want all that great stuff that you want to know how are you and your recruiters communicating with candidates, and what do they want. And then what do the candidates think about it? From the candidate experience standpoint, do they want more of this, less of this? everyone, depending on who you're recruiting for, is going to be different. I worked with an organization that was recruiting truck drivers, by mass, and they did most of their actual communication through text messaging because that's what the preference was, from the candidate base that they were going after. So again, really ton of great technology that's out there on the market that you can use. Hopefully, you're pushing your own ATS provider to actually integrate an ad. Most of those, if you take a look, the mass texting platforms that are out there on the market are actually pretty cheap. Now, there's ones that are specifically designed to work with your ATS to work with candidates. They're more expensive. You can test out a lot of different ones. If you think of like marketing automation, there's some really inexpensive kind of mass texting automation tools that are out there that you can drop in files of candidates that you want to communicate with, and it'll work really well. The next one that I want to talk about is programmatic, and kind of what the F is programmatic advertising. It's a newer concept. Some of you might be aware of it, some of you might not. When you think about programmatic, it's really just kind of the sophisticated algorithm that finds the target audience that you want to go after. Marketing has been using this for years and years and years. In fact, about 98% of the marketing that you receive socially is kind of run through programmatic. Right now, programmatic as an industry for job advertising is probably only about 1 in 5 organizations. And even what I find is that the 20% that are using it, about 50% of those folks don't even know they're using it because they're going through a separate marketing firm that's actually doing it for them, but not explaining what they're doing. They're just like, oh yeah, we're throwing your ads out on, on all of these job sites and Indeeds and job boards like LinkedIn and CareerBuilder or whatever it might be. And that's how, that these companies are, these candidates are finding. They're not explaining what they're actually doing, which is programmatic. And the cool part is you can actually do programmatic on your own. So this is actually gaining a ton of steam. It's going to grow super fast. In the next, I would say within 3 years, it's going to be in the high 90s of organizations who are using programmatic to actually go out because it's cheaper. It's much more highly sophisticated in terms of the audience that you want to go after. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I was at a hospital system and I want to go and I'm going after critical care nurses in the city of Detroit. Like, the programmatic algorithms know exactly who these people are and where they're at. So they don't even have to be on any kind of job-related kind of site. They could be on Facebook. They could be on Nordstrom's, whatever it might be. But they know because of their social footprint who they are, and they keep putting your job ad in front. The cool part is, right, is that not only are they putting the job front in ad, and people might be clicking on it, you're not actually paying unless a person actually applies. So it's following through on some of those tasks. You can choose kind of what you want to do. Now, I'll tell you, some of that stuff is really scary, and why it's been slow to catch on like wildfire within talent acquisition is because the variable cost part is really scary. Because it's like, hey, right now if I just say, oh, hey, CareerBuilder, thanks, I'm just going to spend $1,000 for this job slot, and I can throw my job up there, and I know it's 1,000 hours every month coming out of my budget, and that's so nice and comfortable. But I could do programmatic and maybe only spend $150 and get 5 times the candidates. But it's that variable of pay per applicant. The reality is, though, is you can set the budget and go, hey, I'm only going to max this out to $500, and then actually I'm going to max it out to 5 applicants, and then I'm going to take a look at those applicants. So as soon as I hit 5 applicants, shut it off. And it will do that automatically, and then I can turn it back on, or I can also say, and then use this other money to go over to something else that's my next highest priority that I haven't got a number of applicants that I want. There's some sophistication here, right? So it requires somebody to kind of keep their eye on it and fly. I will tell you again, there's some technologies, and I'll show you those in a minute, that will help you with a lot of this, and you can pay a premium to have them fly for you. But the reality is it's actually pretty easy to use. And if you teach somebody on your team to do it, you can't believe the ROI and the spend and what you'll get. So it's really, really great stuff. Again, programmatic advertising is just growing by leaps and bounds, and you'll see some of the spend stats here. And then, again, I'm not affiliated with any of these people. I really love all the technology that they have, so you can check them out on your own. And it's just one of those great things to be able to utilize. So AppCast, Recruitrix, Symphony Talent has a great built-in kind of programmatic engine, KRT, and there's a lot of other ones out there as well. These are just a handful that I know of. So when you're taking a look at programmatic, one of the things that you want to make sure is the job distribution side of it, right? So what sites are they going to? How is it showing up? And because there is some differentiation in terms of the algorithms and from place to place. So you definitely want to know, like I just don't want to go programmatic and have it show up just on typical job board type things. Like I want to go beyond that and find those talent pools. Do you have control of the job visibility and performance? That's very key. Your ability to target a specific audience, not only, and you should be able to go down and say, hey, by job title, by location, sometimes even by amount of experience, like you really want to dig in to the target the specific audience that you want. It's shocking what these algorithms and these engines know about you as buyers. I always give this example, but I'm like a huge shoe buyer, and those, when I go and take a look at a pair of shoes, whether it's on Nike or Cole Haan or whatever, like every site I go to for the next month, those shoes are following me to those sites. And what we want is our job ads to follow those people, our talent that we want. Obviously, the efficiency and spend, like I talked about, there's some really great controls that certain ones of these technologies have built in. So it's really great to be able to go in and say, hey, what do we have? How do we, where's that spend going? And then also, does it have some natural ability to kind of, once I hit a certain level of applicant, or once I, get enough of something, how do I prioritize to have that spend go someplace else, or just save the spend and hold it for something else I want? And that transparency obviously is right there. So I wanted to leave about 10 minutes, and I think I'm right on. Please reach out. Obviously, take a look at the blogs, my personal email, my website. I'm on the Twitters. I'm on the LinkedIn. Connect with me. I'm a huge person to connect. And we'll open it up for questions. So, Claire, I don't know if there's any out there, if you want to come in. Or if we're trying to, I didn't get a chance to read through as people were kind of typing things. So.
Yeah, sure. I was. That was my role in the webinar, so you're good to go. We do have a couple of questions that are coming in, but like Tim said, we've got 10 minutes for Q&A, as I'm sure was just proven. Tim has some really great advice, so definitely take advantage of this time. First off, we have a question from Blaine. Do current ATS systems have compatibility with programmatic job advertising? And how exactly does the social media aspect of this work?
Yeah, so I will tell you that the only actual built-in programmatic ATS one that I know of that's on the market is Symphony Talent with HOTUS. And again, so it's a new ATS, so not a lot of users on that. But because of HOTUS being the backbone, which obviously is a recruitment marketing firm, they already had the programmatic engine. They kind of built an ATS around it, and so it's one that's out there. But I will tell you, like AppCast and Recruitrix and all these other ones, they actually pull information from your ATS, and so any ATS that has a SaaS model with an open API will be able to work with any of these. Now, if you have a closed API ATS, a little bit harder, but it can be done. So doesn't mean that you can't still work with it. And you could also work with it as just a separate kind of standalone of one. On the social media side, programmatic actually will throw those ads out there organically in front of the individual. So it's not necessarily saying, oh, I'm going right to Facebook, or I'm going to LinkedIn, or I'm going to IG, or whatever it might be. Programmatic is going to go to where the person is. So potentially, if that person's on Facebook, yeah, it's going to go out there on a social media site. But if they're on a consumer site, it's going to go there as well in terms of the banner ads, those side ads that come up. So it's a very rifle approach to recruiting. It's super effective, and it's actually super inexpensive. Like you can just test it and try it for almost nothing. So you should be out there testing programmatic and giving it a shot. You would be shocked at the results you're going to get for the low amount of spend that you'll go as well, comparable to a lot of the tools that we're using. So again, kind of like recruitment automation, I'm in love with programmatic, and it's changing the recruitment landscape as we know it.
Great. And I will make a little plug to Tim's point because we do have an open API. I know for a fact Jobvite integrates with AppCast. I'm not sure about the others, though. We do have the capability, obviously, with an open API. Great.
Yeah, and I know for a fact that AppCast does have a built-in integration with Jobvite as well. So if you're a Jobvite user on the line, that's kind of what, looking at this webinar for sure, give AppCast a call and test that out.
Yeah, and they're a fantastic team. We love them over here. Cool. So we have a question from Joan. Any idea how to stay OFCCP compliant when talking to talent without a specific rec in mind?
Yeah, so there's a lot of organizations right now, and Joan, if you send me an email, I'll give you some specific people you can talk to that are doing this outside of, within the OFCCP guidelines. It's basically defining when somebody actually becomes a candidate, which is they've shown interest in a certain job. So if somebody hasn't shown interest in a specific job for you, what the definition of some of these really kind of large Fortune 500 organizations, and they've worked with the OFCCP to kind of build these processes out, saying, hey, if you're just talking to people about your organization and not about a specific job, you have no concern. Once they've said, hey, I'm interested in X, now you have those guidelines to follow through. So send me an email. I'll send you some information of some individuals that have kind of gone through that already and kind of jumped through those hurdles, because I know it's definitely something that we all have to kind of keep aware of from that standpoint. So. Great.
We have another question from Roger. And if you're on the fence with whether you should take the effort to type out your question, please do. We've got 5 more minutes. Tim is running through these pretty quick. Please make sure we have some more questions to handle. But we have a question from, what is his name? Roger. So what are some names of call software that will track as you are talking about?
So I haven't done a lot of research on it because it's been a while since I've had to implement. We use a system called Call Suite, and it actually works really well. I can pull reports by every single recruiter by extension name. I can give a list. It will tell me. I usually pull like kind of aggregate reports that are bigger, right? So I want to know how many calls did they make on a day or a week? How much time did they spend on those calls outgoing? How many incoming calls, right? Because what I see in the typical behavior is, you'll have somebody make a ton of calls outgoing. Like I'm going to source and call on a position, and they make 50 outgoing calls. Well, they'll spend the next day or two with a ton of incoming calls and actually screening and talking, building relationships with those candidates. So they'll spend more time on the incoming than the outgoing. But we also see behaviors, and I'll tell you, I've been doing this now for 7 years, and almost every single month for 7 years now, I don't know how many total months that is, but the person with the highest call volume outgoing is also the same person with the highest amount of placements, interviews that take place. So the metrics just don't lie in an environment, that we recruit in a tech environment pretty richly. So, I'm a huge believer because I've seen it. I've seen the data, and I see it now. Once in a while, like again, I've had some recruiters that do a really good job with this triple threat thing, or they just have a way of leaving a message, and they might be able to get away with, I would say, a mid-level call volume and have more placements. You're always going to have those rock star recruiters, but for the most part, most of the recruiters, it's still kind of a activity-driven kind of work. So Call Suite works really well. I can even dig into the call, who they're calling. So like if someone's trying to game the system and call home 50 times, like that stuff will pop up and red flag. Not that I'm using it as a hammer. What we do is we love to use it as kind of a first kind of indicator of something that's going wrong. So, if I take a look at my funnel of activity metrics that we're looking at, and you have call volume and interviews and, all these different pieces of the funnel, if I have somebody who's struggling, let's say they're just not getting interviews, we'll say, okay, well, first thing we're going to do is we're just going to increase your call volume by 25%, and let's see what happens. Almost, I mean, 99% of the time, that actually will, that 25% increase in call volume will actually, they'll see an increase in interviews. And so it's, again, it's not real, we're not trying to launch the space shuttle here, it's pretty easy. But sometimes what we'll find is it doesn't. So then we'll go and say, okay, let's look at the quality of people you're sending, right? So the screened candidates and how you're screening. And so we really use it as the first kind of step in terms of training development and diagnosis of how our recruiters are doing, because it allows us to know where the process is failing. We know recruiter to recruiter to recruiter, if you basically follow the same process, you should have the same results. And if you're not, somewhere along the line the training has fallen down or we needed more training. So we don't use it as a hammer. We hire people to be successful. We want them to be wildly successful. We don't hire to fire. So I use it as development. But Call Suite's a good one. There's other ones out there. What you're looking for is just a typical sales training kind of call recording. I don't need to hear the actual call. My system can do that. We don't do that. I'm looking at just metrics, pure metrics from that standpoint. If I'm gonna listen to them call, I'm just gonna sit down next to them and listen to them call and have that conversation. So.
Great. So we have I'm sure a very popular question on many people's minds. This one comes from Gail. Will the launch of Google for Jobs affect recruiting efforts?
Yeah, it will. So a couple things. Just the Google Jobs API, I think actually there's some really cool things that will happen. One is you should search for your own jobs on Google right now and see what shows up and go through that whole Google kind of interface to find out what does that look like. Because if your jobs aren't showing up, then you need to dig into why. It could be bad SEO on your jobs. It could be that the ATS or the system you're using isn't using the Google API or to its advantage enough. And so now all of a sudden your jobs are showing up what we call below the fold, right? They're not going to show up instantly. And so that's super important because companies like Indeed who are not integrated with Google API and Google will not integrate with Indeed, you're probably going to see about a 40% less traffic to your Indeed jobs because they're not going to show up anymore on the Google. And so you need to kind of go through and really take a look again at your spend and then make a determination of how better can I use that spend instead of going and spending that money on Indeed. Is there a better way, recruitment automation, that I can spend that money and still get the same results? Maybe an SEO, maybe using like a program like Texio, which does really great kind of job description writing assistance in SEO for you. But it also might be worth bringing in some SEO experts to figure out, how can we rewrite or write our jobs in a way. We've forgotten about that for a long time because we just kind of like, oh, Indeed scraping our jobs and that, oh my gosh, we get all this great organic traffic from Indeed. Well, Google changed the game. And so you better start looking at where the traffic is coming from because you're going to see some pretty drastic reductions. And so we're a career builder shop. All of our jobs are posted there. My rep actually just showed me my last month's statistics because of the Google API turning on. We got a 51% increase in the traffic of our jobs through Google API because of our integration with Career Builder. So it's definitely something you have to keep your eye on. It's going to change up the game for sure.
Awesome. Well, I know we have a couple more questions, but I do want to be cognizant of people's time. I know that it's 12:01 here on the West Coast, so I just want to wrap things up. Thank you very much to Tim for presenting this awesome presentation, and thank you to all of you who are still on the line. To the final question that I will answer, yes, you will be getting the presentation slides, and yes, you will be getting the recording. Those will be in your inbox by tomorrow morning. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great one.